Let's just add a minute or two just to soak in. Getting out our cotton wool bud again, what we're going to do now, right, because this isn't that strong as in to like really wrinkle it up, it allows us to sort of kind of play a little bit. We can basically come along with a cotton wool bud and just roll the cotton wool bud across, not drag, right? If you drag, you're going to just pull the decal, but if you roll it across, I don't know how well you can see it on camera, but you kind of just see that the decal just gets pushed down that little bit better, and it just kind of really sort of just locks down, as well as moisture, air, big one on the air. The air's being pushed out from underneath the decal, right? And that there will then give you a much more nicely placed down decal. So then with that done, we can come along with the Mr. Mark softener. Now this stuff really sort of softens up decals. If you kind of touch the decal sort of after putting this stuff on, you can sort of really smudge. I have found, I mean, some decals work a little bit differently. Some actually kind of almost melt, you touch it and it's like it just smudges. Some of them just really sort of crease up and all sorts of things, but basically you don't really want to touch it once you've got the Mr. Mark softener just on there. Let it do its work. You'll probably see it wrinkle up. That's absolutely normal, absolutely fine. Once it dries, it'll sort of basically sort of shrink back and stop wrinkling up. So if you've got stuff like recessed panel lines, recessed rivets and whatnot, that whole wrinkling process is almost kind of like expanding the decal a little bit, and it kind of then sucks down into recesses or even raised areas, and then when it dries it kind of sort of unwrinkles and shrinks back down and kind of just sucks onto whatever it is you are doing, and that's where you get that sort of sprayed on look, which is rather cool. Now you might have to do 2, maybe 3 coats of that. Just kind of look at it. Okay, let's put another coat of Mr. Mark softener on there, and after that it should go down rather nicely. As you can see, I've already whacked on some decals just here, right, and I've done one just here, and it has, you know, gone nicely into those recesses, as you can see just there. Really, it's actually done a good job of going into the recesses. I mean, normally if it's like not quite gone into any sort of recesses, what I'd do is I'd come along with a blade. Once it's kind of pretty sort of dry, I'll very lightly with a blade follow the recessed panel line and just let the weight of the blade kind of just drag along that recessed panel line, which will just very lightly cut into it, right? And then I'd come along with some more softener, paint that on top, right? And then the the Mr. Mark softener then will be able to get in and underneath the decal where that recessed panel line is, where it's been cut, and really sort of bring that down. So then when it comes to weathering, we can put washes on top and it's just going to go nicely across the decals, rather than what you don't want is you put a wash on at the end in the weathering stage and you've got all these recessed panel lines showing the wash, but then you come to a decal and it just breaks, it's just flat, it's blank. You don't really want that. So, you know, making sure you get those recessed panel lines down and stuff does make a nice difference. Right, so get a couple of coats on top of that. So we now got all the decals down just on here, hopefully, as you can see. Looking all rather cool. It's all nicely conformed and stuck down, pretty solid. But what we're going to do now is, when it comes to decals, you want to be sandwiching it in. We've got our actual spray work down, and then we've got the gloss coat on top of that. So then the sandwich side of it is where you got the gloss coat, you got your decals, but then we want to put another gloss coat on top, and that sandwiches it down, locks it down, stops them from coming off, kind of blends it in with the model as well a little bit, and makes it all look like they're being sprayed on. But before we can do that, the problem is a lot of these decals, they can sort of leave a bit of a residue behind. So you know, what we could do is we could get a kitchen paper towel, maybe a bit of water, get it a little bit moist, and then what we're going to simply do, right, is we're going to come in on these decals, and you might just be able to see it on camera, like a little bit of a haze around the actual decal itself. That's like this leftover decaling solution, and what we want to do is basically a little bit of a moist kitchen paper towel, right, just rub around these decals, and as you can see, we're getting some sort of gunk off there. Right, I mean, you obviously want to make sure your decals have I mean, really potentially had overnight to sort of dry, because you don't want to be rubbing at these and then sort of like ripping them up. We don't want to be sort of pressing down too hard. It's just enough just to clean up the residue that's been left over by the decals, so that when we do actually come along and do some spraying, it's not gonna hinder it. I know sometimes in the past, when I first started out, if I ever sort of didn't do that, it was quite possible that the gloss, you'd spray it down, the decaling solution would almost kind of act like oil to water, so it's sort of like make the gloss sort of separate and not go in those little areas where you got the decaling solution. So then you'd come along with stuff like all your weathering products and stuff, and the weathering products can then sort of eat into the paintwork and make a nasty stain, and it looks all horrible and everything, and it doesn't quite work right. So you do want to be cleaning this nicely all up and getting that little bit of residue off. The next thing as well is, you know, I've already shown you sort of like using this gloss, you know, the floor cleaner Pledge, just kind of spray a nice sort of nice, about 2 or 3 coats should nicely do it, and then leave that to dry overnight, and then all your decals are really nicely locked in, ready for weathering. All nicely glossed in and left to dry. I haven't left this overnight yet to dry because you know, we want to leave it overnight to dry, so when we do all our weathering, there's going to be no sort of reactions, right? Because as quick as this might feel, touch dry and everything, you want it to dry and cure down to the bone for that. So while we're sort of waiting for that, we can move along with other things that we know aren't going to react. So a little bit of touching up with the painting. I have got some Citadel base Avaland Sunset. It's a really sort of nice, almost dirty sort of yellow. What the problem we've got is with all our decaling, if we sort of bring you in, you'll probably see this a bit better, but with our decaling we do have 2 pieces of decals. One goes this side, see this big yellow line stripe down there, and then we've also got another piece of decal that goes along and down here. Now these can be a little bit problematic, because what tends to happen is you might have this sort of bare bit of black. You might just be able to see it's right on the edge, that little bit of black just running down there. Sometimes you also get at the top. We've also got it just at the back here. You can see that. I think you can see that a hell of a lot more clearer. It's just where the 2 decals haven't quite met. It's quite tricky to do, so to try and get it right is rather hard, but actually the way to sort of sort it is just paint it. Now for this, I have found for this particular colour that Avalanche Sunset does seem to be a good match. It's probably not going to be perfect. I'm looking at it, it's not 100% perfect, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, if we do this before the weathering stage, we're going to be okay, because any sort of slightly off colours we can just come along and sort of weather around it to sort of blend it in. So a little bit of simple water, with our Avalanche Sunset. I should probably put this on a palette, I know, but I don't know, I've just got used to doing it like this. I sort of mix it on the pot itself. But what we want to do is with the side of our brush, right, not using the tip, because this is right on the edge, the side of our brush is just going to paint this in a lot nicer and easier. Now this is yellow, so you're probably going to have to do a couple of coats, but hopefully, as you can see, that's just disappearing. Bit of coverage on that with 1 or 2 more coats, and it does look like a pretty good sort of match. I've got this back bit here which was probably a little bit more clearer to see on camera, but getting a bit of this paint, and again using the side of our brush, we can just nicely paint down there, and that then sort of gets rid of that little bit of a noticeable bit there. Now, as I say, with the weathering, we can't really cover that right now, but later on in this series, we'll just sort of cover it. Probably something like just like a light misty bit of a spray, just to kind of make it look dirty, but then it blends in the colour of our decor and blends in the colour of our paint, and then you end up basically not noticing it. So don't worry about not getting the exact match, but get it as close as you can.